and welcome to our Quilts Equals Art Equals Quilts Artist Talks. I'm joined today with Helen Geglio from South Bend, Indiana, and she's going to tell us about some of her work. Welcome, Helen.
Hi.
Helen, I wanted to start off by asking you about the two pieces that are in the exhibit. Can you tell us a little bit more about those works?
The two pieces that are in the exhibit are two of the three quilted works I made called anxiety shields. I made them during November, December of 2020 and January of 2021. And I was feeling a lot of anxiety, particularly around the election and the fallout after the election. And I was having trouble sleeping. And I just kind of channeled that into some images of a protective shield. And so that's kind of where those came from. The third anxiety shield is also on display out in California in interpretations at Vision Museum. So all three of the anxiety shields are being displayed this fall, which is a real honor. The two that are in the Schweinfurth are Vigil and Force Field. The quilts basically use a palette of materials that I chose from my arsenal of repurposed fabrics and threads. And these are kind of I don't know, part of how I do business. I start looking for fabrics first. I'll have an idea and then kind of look at what fabrics I have in my collection and try to use what I have. And that's what I did with these anxiety shields.
To talk a little bit about your fabrics in particular, and having handled your work for a couple of years now, I can tell you that they always have, I know you used reclaimed materials, and they always have this wonderful worn quality to them, and sort of it captures the intimacy of that material. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, your process of collecting those materials and how you choose and everything like that?
I first of all, a lot of people know the kind of work I do, so people give me stuff. And so a lot of the things I have is of completely unknown provenance. It's things that people have had in their attics or basements or closets. And then, they're cleaning out someday and they think, I wonder if Helen can use this. I also got a lot of materials from the emptying of my parents' home after their death. And we, my sisters and I, spent weeks going through all the things. And a lot of the things that I salvaged were kind of what I call textile detritus, things that were curious, if nothing else, and interested me or spoke to me in some way. In the two quilts that are in the Schweinfurth show, Quilts Equals Art Equals Quilts 21, I backed those quilts with woven wool that was back from the days when I made my own clothes. And that goes way back. But, I was a teacher, and I showed myself wool skirts and wool jackets and things like that. And so I never threw away any wool. And I pieced together some of the cutoffs from garment making to make the backs of those quilts. I find wool very pleasurable to stitch on, and it made a great substrate for these particular works, which were so heavily stitched.
Tell us about the stitching, because we'll try to get some detail shots to show, but one thing you kind of miss in those overall images is the handwork of your pieces. It adds this beautiful visual layer. Why is it so important to you to hand stitch and to work it in that fashion?
Well, I came to textile work not as a technician. It's not that I don't know how to use a sewing machine or I don't have some of those skills, but it's not the part of working with textiles that particularly interests me. I'm more interested in the evidence of the maker. And so I've kind of made a decision to work mostly by hand when I can. And that may change. I mean, I may end up getting arthritis in my hands or something else. But for now, I'm using the hand stitch both as a way to kind of connect to the image I'm trying to make, and also to kind of express to the viewer this idea of things made by hand, the idea of mending and repair, and using the hand stitch as almost a mark making tool. And well, it is a mark making tool, and especially in these particular works. For these, I was in kind of a high state of anxiety, which is not like me. I'm kind of a yoga personality, kind of, everything's all good. But I was feeling a lot of stress, with everything. It was a really stressful time. And so I found that actually using the hand stitch and the hours and hours that I was using to make these quilts and hand stitching was restorative. It was, I think, the idea of the slow stitch, the idea of slowing down, almost a meditative quality to the stitches that we're making served me well during this time of great anxiety.
I'm actually really interested in the idea of the shield nature of these two pieces. And I also see it connecting to another body of work of yours for the PPE breastplates that you created. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I'm also interested in the notion that fiber and an intimate, soft, sort of feminine, lovely object can be a shield. And that is something I find fascinating. So can you tell me a little bit about that series?
Well, Davana, I was interested in that too. And I've been kind of thinking about protection for a couple of years. I'm in the midst, toward the end, of a really large series that I'm calling Wisdom Cloaks. Something we wrap around us, this idea of feminine wisdom, particularly of older women. And so I was making these sort of garments, kind of a garment type of thing. And then the pandemic came, and where some of my artist friends were really kind of paralyzed by the pandemic, for me, it was a very fruitful time of creativity. I didn't have a lot of obligations in my life. Things were sort of on hold. A lot of my friends were making masks, and I started making armor. I kind of went down a rabbit hole in some of the research I was doing, and I was looking up breastplates and armor and objects of protection, and then translating that into fiber. And so I did do a whole series of three-dimensional breastplates that I worked on that I called women's PPE, kind of protective garments to give women resilience and power during a very troubling time. That way of thinking about protection is what led to the shields. During my research about armor, I also found a snapshot of one of my favorite pieces of textile art in the world, the Bayeux Tapestry. And so the piece Vigil, which will be at the Schweinfurth in this show, is kind of modeled on the Norman shield in the Bayeux Tapestry, the long, narrow shield. And it's called Vigil because it's kind of a full body shield. I think that there's a lot of metaphors that I'm kind of mixing here, but the idea of a blanket of protection, and then that shield shape that appears in each of these is kind of along this whole line of that I've been thinking about these last 3 years, 3, maybe 4, about objects of protection. I'm interested in amulets and charms and some of the things, the visual things that we use to provide at least a psychological protection from danger or harm.
I love that because, when we think about protection, we tend to cast our minds towards like masculine notions of metal and steel and these encasements. The earliest forms of protection that human beings ever gave themselves was the clothing we put on our bodies. And that's the most basic ritual we go through every single day to protect our bodies from the rest of the world. So like connecting it back to, protecting yourself in times of anxiety, like cloth.
Yeah,
the thing.
It's a elemental human need, the need for shelter and clothing and things to protect us from the elements and everything else. I think it's a real powerful idea. So that's kind of where I was coming from with these 3 shield pieces.
Yeah. Another work that we had here, maybe it wasn't last year, or I mean, it was several years ago, that struck me because all of your works, they have these visual components, but there's usually some type of story or concept behind them. And they were the triangle fire shirts.
Yeah.
Can you tell everyone a little bit about those pieces?
Yeah. Those pieces, again, you're right. I wanted to tell a story with those. I was working on the idea of women's work and kind of exploring, just the toil that generations before us women in generations before us were just basically tied to the toil of taking care of the family, laundry, textiles, everything. It just was hours and hours and hours of hard work and necessary work that had to be done. And I didn't feel like I could complete that series without talking about women that worked in the sweatshops of the garment district at the turn of the century. And these were immigrants, which also fed into some narratives that we've been talking about for years. These were immigrants who came from Italy, mostly southern Italy, and some were from Eastern Europe. That was primarily the young teenagers that were working in the triangle factory, and nobody was protecting them. Nobody thought about the dangers of having all these young women working with fibers all over the place, 8 and 9 stories above the street level, and then locking the doors because they didn't want them to take any of those shirtwaists out with them. And as a result, we know what happened. It was a time of horror. The building went up and some people perished in the flames and others jumped from the ledges. It was just awful. And it was almost all teenage girls. So that was a really powerful story. And I thought, I'm going to tell this because guess what? I happen to have a turn of the century shirtwaist blouse. And I thought, wow, I can use that. So I cut it in half. The 2 quilts were, one was the top, the front part, and the other one was the back. And that's kind of what those were heartbreaking. And they're still heartbreaking for me.
Yeah. One thing I've been noticing, and maybe I don't know. I feel like lately there's been a rise in like the desire to look at and appreciate fiber art and to slow down the making process with the hand. So it's just all of the things that you're hitting on. I'm seeing more and more artists. Maybe it's because my interest has gone that way. But why do you think it's important to be working in the tradition of women's work today?
Well, I mean, I think that we can, first of all, I think we want to honor the ancient ones, the people that actually figured out how to, make fibers, weave them into cloth, and then turn them into garments and useful things for just survival. We want to honor that. I think we also want to honor the handwork of the women in our own families and our own traditions so that we don't discard or minimize the beauty of some of these objects that we inherit and don't know what to do with. I'm really interested in the idea of salvaging and rescuing some of those things because they represent just the time and the love of people, women that will never know, making these beautiful things. And I guess I see myself in that stream of time. I see myself in that same stream of time as someone that's making things slowly and with thought and with an eye toward telling a story or showing an emotion. And even though I feel like I'm looking at it with the eyes of an artist rather than a craftsperson, that idea of something made by hand and the care that we take when we make something by hand is important. I think so.
Yeah. Do you have any upcoming projects or new bodies of work that you're working on right now?
Thank you so much for asking. I have started a new series of work just this last couple of weeks. We'll see where it goes. It's called Apron Strings, and it's long pieces of white kind of gauzy fabric that I'm embroidering just in the lab, so I can do it when I'm in the car or doing something that doesn't require my full attention. And these apron strings are to represent those moments in motherhood. Now, motherhood is a very dangerous topic for women artists. I think we get kind of afraid of it because there's a lot of baggage that goes with talking about being a mother and being an artist and being taken seriously as an artist. And I'm not going to worry about that too much because I think something as pivotal in our lives as bringing children into the world and then shepherding them to adulthood deserves more artistic consideration. So I'm on it. I'm going to be working on that. I've started with a couple of small quilt forms using these strings, but I'm kind of starting to think maybe I'm going to work a little more 3D or maybe work with some non-traditional things. I'm not there yet, but these things are kind of turning around in my head. And so I'm going to be working with these apron strings for a while and finishing 2 of the last of my wisdom cloaks, which will also be about motherhood. Those are the ones I've saved last. One's going to be kind of a matriarchal story, the idea of generations of women. And the other one is going to be this idea of charms for protection of these children in our care. So that's where I'm going.
I'm actually so glad you bring that up because there was this article out really recently on the taboo of motherhood, a new article. I mean, it's something that we've been talking about for a while, but it's a new article. And it sort of hit upon artists not so long ago, female artists were reluctant to make artwork about motherhood because to consider the idea of having children at all was another thing. But to not get pushed into the box of she's a female artist, she's a women's work artist, she's working on women's issues, and ignoring the fact that women are 50% of the population, that wouldn't be important for people to see. And, we're having new generations tackle this unresolved work that got ignored for a long time. And I'm excited about that personally.
Yeah. We may have read the same article because I was digging around a little bit because just being around, I know that women have a hard time doing work particularly about motherhood. I think that, the female body has certainly become something that has been embraced by more women. But the idea of the day-to-day, the everyday moments, the driving to music lessons, the orthodontia, that all those moments that kind of get lost in this flow of family life. We don't do anything with that. And yet it's so pivotal to who we are. My goodness, I have 4 kids and basically spent 30 years raising children. Between when the first was born and the youngest graduated from college was 30 years. I mean, that's a huge chunk of time. And one that I thought I needed to evaluate and kind of examine as an artist. So we'll see where that goes. Stay tuned.
I'm excited. Is there anything about your work or a particular topic that I have left out, or something you want to mention before we go?
I think you've hit on a lot of the main points of what drives me, of what makes me tick. And at the bottom and at the heart of everything is I'm a storyteller. And even though my work is very abstract, it's driven by a narrative, maybe just a narrative in my own head. And it doesn't matter whether the viewer knows that narrative, but I think that what I make helps the viewer connect to their own stories about the kinds of things I'm working with and the ideas that I'm trying to grapple with. And I think that will certainly be true when people get a close look at the anxiety quilts. I think you can feel the stress as you're looking at them. And at the same time, the beauty of a time of kind of unencumbered ability to make art without any obligations. My goodness, we even had a Zoom Christmas. No cookies, no nothing. The time was my own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. If you guys want to hear or learn any more about Helen's work, you can check out her website. Be sure to come to the exhibit. It's open until January 9th. And thank you so much, Helen.
Oh, it was just a pleasure. Thank you so much, too.